The chamber had no windows. That was the first thing every new delegate noticed, though few were foolish enough to mention it aloud. The Grand Assembly Hall of Station 8 lay buried beneath 6 layers of armor hull, sealed away from the stars, from sunlight, from anything that might remind those inside how small politics looked against the size of space. The architects had called it symbolic. Decisions made here were meant to feel permanent. To Ambassador Yara Oay, it had always felt like a tomb. She had entered the hall 41 times over the last 7 years. She knew the measured echo of footsteps on the black stone floor, the dry chill of recycled air, the faint vibration of the walls from engines large enough to move a city through vacuum. She knew the pale overhead lights were tuned for Vorith eyesight and slightly too harsh for human eyes. She knew no one had ever considered changing them. The room was already full when she arrived. That alone was unusual. Routine sessions of the Galactic Conclave rarely drew full attendance. Important species sent junior staff. Others joined remotely through proxy links. But today, every primary delegation was present in person. 12 curved tables formed a ring beneath the vaulted ceiling, each marked by the insignia of its world. Seats were occupied. Aides stood behind them with tablets in hand. Above, the observation galleries were crowded with press attaches, legal clerks, and silent watchers pretending not to stare. No one came in person for ordinary business. The human delegation table stood where it always had. Third from the left, slightly behind the natural center line of the chamber, close enough to imply equality, far enough to deny it. That placement had been debated 63 years ago when Earth first entered the conclave. It had never been changed. Yara set her case beside her chair and sat without hurry. Inside the case were a personal tablet, a thermos of coffee gone cold 2 hours ago, and a folder of notes she had reviewed on the flight in. Nothing dramatic. Nothing ceremonial. If anyone expected humans to arrive begging or furious, they would be disappointed. Across the chamber sat the Vorith delegation, tall, narrow-shouldered, their skin marked by soft bands of bioluminescence that shifted color with mood. They carried themselves with the practiced calm of a species accustomed to being obeyed. Their lead ambassador, Sareth Ka, was already watching her. He did not look away when their eyes met. Neither did she. Around him, the other delegations made small performances of not noticing. The Keth whispered among themselves. The Pell reviewed documents they had certainly already memorized. A Morvian legal aide adjusted a stack of papers into perfect alignment for the 3rd time in 1 minute. Nervous habits always spread before formal cruelty. At the center dais, High Arbiter's son had not yet spoken. Ancient even by Morvian standards, his face had settled into the hard stillness of old stone. He sat with both hands folded, gaze lowered, as if waiting for the room to become honest enough to begin. Yara glanced once toward the galleries above. Reporters, observers, too many of them. So the decision had already been made. Whatever happened today was not a debate. It was theater. She leaned back slightly in her chair and let her eyes move across the chamber one final time. The lights, the polished floor, the banners of 12 worlds hanging motionless in conditioned air. The tables built to last centuries. The species who believed systems remained stable because they were old. There was a particular silence that came before institutions made mistakes. She had heard it before. A clerk stepped forward, carrying the sealed resolution case. The room straightened as one. The clerk placed the sealed case upon the central pedestal with both hands, as if weight alone made it important. Its surface was brushed silver, engraved with the insignia of the conclave and 12 smaller marks beneath it, one for each founding species. There was no human mark among them. There never had been. No one spoke while the locks disengaged. The sound was small, precise, final. High Arbiter's son rose slowly from his seat at the center dais. Even that movement altered the room. Conversations died mid-breath. Tablets were lowered. In the galleries above, the watchers leaned forward with a hungry discipline of people trained to appear detached. Yara remained seated. She knew ceremony when she saw it. Ceremony was what powerful institutions used when they wanted violence to look orderly. The Arbiter opened the case and removed a thin sheet of pale polymer. Not paper, nothing so old-fashioned, but designed to resemble it. Conclave law loved symbols almost as much as it loved hierarchy. Delegates, Sun said. His voice was low, dry, and perfectly amplified. It filled the chamber without seeming to rise. A motion has been brought under Article 9, Section 4 of the Membership Continuity Charter, full attendance having been confirmed. The Assembly is now in special session. Around the circle, several ambassadors adjusted their posture in carefully measured ways. The Keth delegate folded 4 hands atop the table. A Pell observer stopped pretending to review notes. Sereth Ka simply watched Yara with the faint attention of someone waiting to see whether a prediction would come true. So this was how they wanted it. Publicly, Yara rested one hand on the arm of her chair. The metal was cool beneath her fingers. She noticed, absurdly, that someone had polished a human table since her last visit. The alloy surface reflected the lights in clean white lines. Prepared for guests. Prepared for witnesses. The clerk stepped aside the arbiter and began distributing encrypted copies of the resolution to each delegation. One by one, lights blinked alive at the tables as private displays accepted the file. When the human terminal lit, Yara did not open it immediately. She already knew, not the wording, perhaps not the chosen legal language or the decorative accusations that would justify what had been decided in private corridors weeks ago. But she knew the shape of it. She had known ever since full attendance was announced, ever since the galleries filled, ever since Sereth Ka had looked pleased before proceedings even began. Important rooms had tells. Just like people, she tapped the screen at last. The title appeared first. Resolution on the suspension and removal of Earth membership status. Clean, formal, bloodless. For a moment the chamber seemed to grow quieter still. Then, from somewhere high in the gallery, a single communicator was hastily silenced. Yara closed the file, without scrolling further. Across from her, Sereth Ka's bioluminescent markings shifted briefly toward blue, the Vorth equivalent of calm satisfaction. He believed the difficult part was over. That was useful to know. High Arbiter Sun looked once around the chamber, his stone face unreadable. The resolution, he said, will now be entered into record. The clerk inclined his head and began to read. He spoke first in standard trade, then again in the 5 recognized diplomatic tongues. Each version adjusted for grammar, cadence, and cultural precision. The wording shifted slightly between languages, as it always did. Meaning did not. Earth was charged with destabilizing commercial practices. Earth was charged with refusal to submit human-developed technologies for conclave licensing review. Earth was charged with repeated violations of the Non-Assimilation Compact. Earth was charged with psychological volatility in diplomatic settings. That last phrase nearly made Yara smile. Somewhere in the wording of law, years of irritation had been distilled into a sentence. The clerk continued. Pending ratification, Earth's membership status would be revoked effective immediately. Human delegations would lose voting rights, access privileges, and protected internal transit standing. Human commercial entities would be required to reapply under non-member frameworks. Human citizens residing in conclave jurisdictions would be granted a limited transition period before residency protections expired. 2 standard centuries. That was the proposed term of exclusion. Reversal will require unanimous consent of all 12 member species. A threshold so impossible it might as well have read never. Around the chamber, no one reacted outwardly. Professionals rarely did. But Yara had spent enough years in rooms like this to read stillness the way others read speech. The Keth ambassador kept her eyes on the desk because shame was easier when directed downward. The Pell delegation looked bored too carefully. A Morvian legal advisor was already annotating implementation clauses before the vote had even been called. Across from her, Sereth Ka listened with the serenity of a man attending the unveiling of architecture he had personally funded. So he had written most of it. Of course he had. The charge regarding technology review was his language, broad enough to punish success, vague enough to survive challenge. The residency clause carried Morvian legal fingerprints. The psychological volatility line was petty, which meant Vorth almost certainly. They had collaborated. How touching. The clerk reached the final paragraph and closed the document with ceremonial precision. The resolution having been read into record, he said, the assembly may proceed. High Arbiter Sun let several seconds pass before speaking. He had always understood the value of silence better than most diplomats understood speech. Before vote is called, he said, custom grants the affected delegation opportunity for final statement. His gaze settled on the human table. Ambassador Oay, does Earth wish to address the chamber? Every face turned toward her. Above, the galleries leaned forward as one organism. This was the moment they had truly come to see, not the vote, which was already decided, but the reaction, rage, pleading, threats, a human scene to justify everything written on the page. Yara rose slowly. The hall waited. She smoothed one crease from the sleeve of her jacket, glanced once at the closed terminal before her, then lifted her eyes to the 12 tables arranged in a circle designed to resemble equality. For the first time that morning, she looked entirely at ease. We have been members of this conclave for 63 years, Yara said. She did not raise her voice. The chamber had been built for acoustics. Even a quiet statement reached every seat. It was one of the few things in the room designed efficiently. In that time, Earth contributed personnel, infrastructure, logistics, medical research, arbitration services, and technical systems used across member space. No one moved. We staffed 4 of the 6 cross-species medical stations currently operating in the inner systems. Human firms manage approximately 31% of registered non-military cargo flow under the Conclave's own last audit. 9 of the 17 major transit expansions completed in the last half-century use human engineering leads. She paused only long enough for the numbers to settle. Sarika's expression had not changed, but one band of light at his throat flickered once, then steadied. Yara noticed. I mentioned these things, she continued, not as argument against the resolution. Several heads lifted slightly. There was the first deviation from script. I mentioned them so the record is complete. The galleries above went still enough that she could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. She let her gaze pass from table to table. Keth, Pel, Morvian, Vorith, species who had traded with Earth, hired Earth, relied on Earth, resented Earth, underestimated Earth, often in that order. We understand the vote, she said. Her tone remained calm, almost courteous. We understand what it means. A longer pause this time. We simply request that it also be understood clearly and permanently that we are not surprised. The sentence landed harder than anger would have. No accusation, no pleading, no threat, only certainty. For the first time that morning, several delegates looked uncertain. The Keth ambassador's upper hands tightened atop the desk. A Pel advisor whispered something too softly to hear. Sarith Ka's bioluminescence shifted toward yellow for half a breath before returning to disciplined blue. He had expected resistance. He had prepared speeches for resistance. He had prepared legal counters for outrage, procedural barriers for appeals, moral lectures for emotional displays. He had not prepared for agreement. Yara inclined her head toward the arbiter with the exact degree of respect protocol required, and no more. Then she sat down. The sound of the chair settling seemed louder than it should have been. High Arbiter Sun watched her for several unreadable seconds. His old stone face revealed nothing, but one hand moved to rest flat upon the desk before him, as though feeling for vibrations in the foundation. When he finally spoke, his voice was even. The vote will proceed. The clerk activated the tally system. A ring of lights ignited around the chamber floor, one before each delegation table. Names appeared in sequence above them, ordered by founding precedents rather than population, contribution, or relevance. Tradition had a talent for preserving advantages long after anyone remembered why they existed. Vorith. Sarith Ka pressed his vote without hesitation. Affirmative. Of course. A blue light hardened above his table. Keth. Ambassador Swendble's hands remained still for a moment too long. Then she touched the panel. Affirmative. She did not look toward the human table. Pel. Affirmative. Morvian. A slight pause from High Arbiter Sun. Procedure required neutrality. It did not exempt him from participation. Affirmative. One by one the names continued. Some voices were crisp, some reluctant, some professionally blank. One delegate cleared his throat before speaking, as if the word itself had weight. Yara listened to every vote, not because the outcome mattered now. It did not, but because memory did. When the Jurassic delegation was called, their ambassador adjusted 2 sets of spectacles, reviewed a note no one believed he needed, and finally said, "Abstain." A murmur moved through the galleries before being suppressed. That was the closest the Jurassic ever came to dissent. The clerk continued. The final seat, Thun, remained dark. No representative had arrived. Yara had noted that absence the moment she entered. Interesting. The tally ring dimmed, then reformed into final count above the dais. 12 seats called, 10 affirmative, 1 abstention, 1 absent. More than enough. The resolution passed. No applause followed. Even this room understood instinctively that celebration would cheapen what it preferred to call procedure. High Arbiter Sun stood. By authority vested in this assembly, the motion is ratified. Earth membership status is hereby revoked under terms entered into record, effective immediately. He repeated the declaration in all 6 languages. Each version sounded colder than the last. At the human table, Yara remained seated until the final syllable ended. Then she rose, opened a small case beside her chair, and checked its contents as if confirming a travel list. Tablet, thermos, folder of notes. Nothing missing. Around the chamber, aides were already waking communicators, transmitting alerts, drafting market advisories, preparing statements for governments that would soon pretend surprise. The gallery's buzz would contain urgency. Across from her, Sareth Ka watched with sharpened attention. He was still waiting for outrage, waiting for a threat, waiting for something he could recognize as defeat. High Arbiter Sun's gaze settled once more on the human table. "Ambassador Oay," he said, "does Earth wish to enter a formal response or ratification?" The room became perfectly silent again. Yara closed the case and lifted it under one arm. Then she looked slowly around the chamber, at the curved tables, the banners, the pale lights tuned for other eyes, the architecture built to feel permanent. When she spoke, her voice was almost gentle. "We accept." She adjusted the case beneath her arm. "Effective immediately," Yara added. The words moved through the chamber like a draft through sealed doors. Several aides froze mid-transmission. A pale delegate frowned, as if replaying the sentence for hidden meaning. The Keth ambassador finally looked up. Sareth Ka's throat markings flashed yellow before discipline forced him still. High Arbiter Sun did not move at all. Yara inclined her head once formally. "Good luck," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the main doors. Not fast, not dramatic. No final glance over her shoulder. The measured pace of someone who knew exactly how long the corridor was and had no need to hurry toward it. The doors parted at her approach. For a moment, the bright corridor light beyond spilled into the chamber, washing pale across the dark floor. Then she passed through, and the doors sealed behind her with a soft mechanical hush. Only after they closed did anyone in the room breathe normally. The galleries erupted first, not loudly, but in 100 urgent whispers. Messages flew. Reporters leaned over rails, already composing headlines that now felt less certain than they had a moment ago. At the tables below, delegates turned to aides. What did she mean? Effective immediately? Transit rights terminate now. Can they do that? Questions multiplied faster than answers. Sareth Ka remained seated. He replayed the scene in silence, searching for the part where he had won. The wording of the decree had been precise. Membership revoked. Voting rights ended. Access rescinded. Human entities reclassified pending review. Clean. Total. Yet the phrase would not leave him. Effective immediately. He had expected petitions within the hour. Emergency appeals by nightfall. Human firms requesting temporary exemptions before dawn. There would have been negotiation, leverage, noise. Instead, there had been acceptance. Acceptance was harder to control. At the center dais, High Arbiter Sun lowered himself back into his chair with slow care. "Clerk," he said. "Yes, Arbiter?" "Circulate implementation guidance to all stations. At once." "Include a review," Sun continued, "of critical roles presently occupied by human personnel." The clerk hesitated. Critical roles, Arbiter? Sunstone's face did not change. If we knew all of them, he said quietly, we would not need a review. Across the chamber, for the first time that day, Sarah Ka felt something colder than triumph. Outside, in the corridor beyond the sealed doors, Yara Oay was already walking toward the diplomatic docks. She did not look back. Halfway there, she removed a communicator from her pocket and opened a pre-written message addressed to 412 recipients across Conclave space. She pressed send. The message contained 6 words. It passed. You know what to do. Yara returned the communicator to her pocket and kept walking. The corridor to docking ring 3 curved gently along the station's inner spine, lined with polished metal panels and directional lights that had never once been recalibrated for human stride length. She had walked it dozens of times over the years, usually toward meetings, negotiations, ceremonies, delays disguised as process. Today it felt shorter. Station staff passed her in both directions carrying tablets, cargo tags, trays of documents no one would ever physically need. Some recognized her. Some pretended not to. A junior clerk from the archives slowed, as if about to speak, thought better of it, and continued on. No one stopped her. That, too, was unusual. At the far end of the corridor, the docking bay doors opened onto a broad chamber of steel gantries, fuel lines, and quiet mechanical noise. Human Transport Civic Meridian waited at berth 14, hull lights warm against the gray station walls. It was not a military vessel, not even impressive by Conclave standards. Functional lines, cargo-capable frame, efficient engine block, the kind of ship people underestimated until they needed something moved quickly. A crew chief stood at the foot of the boarding ramp. Ambassador, he said. Captain. He glanced toward the station interior. How bad? It passed. He nodded once. No surprise. Then we're cleared. We are now. No more was needed. As Yara boarded, station announcements began chiming overhead in 3 languages, then 6. Administrative notices, transit updates, revised access procedures following assembly action. Bureaucracy was always fastest when paperwork favored power. Inside the ship, she set her case beside a narrow seat and finally opened the thermos. The coffee was cold enough to be unpleasant. She drank it anyway. Across Conclave space, messages were arriving. At Conclave Medical Station Merith, Chief Specialist Dr. Amara Voss received a 6-word text while reviewing overnight triage reports. She read it once, opened a blank resignation form, and began typing before the nurse beside her had finished asking what happened. At Relay Station Board 4, 17 human maintenance engineers stopped mid-shift, compared identical messages, and resumed work long enough to finish the diagnostics already in progress. At the Inner Belt Cargo Exchange, 3 logistics supervisors quietly scheduled end-of-contract notices for firms that had been renewed so many times no one remembered their original terms. At Arbitration Bureau Quorum, 24 legal analysts archived open case files, flagged jurisdictional dependencies, and booked transport out. No speeches, no protest banners, no dramatic walkouts. Just calendars opened, forms completed, backups exported, notices drafted with exact compliance to every clause Conclave law required. The first resignation was filed 32 minutes after the vote. The second came 9 seconds later. By station midnight, there were 41. On 8 Han, High Arbiter Sun received the preliminary count while still in session reviewing implementation memos. He read the number twice, then requested a broader staffing report. Across the room, Sareth Ka was dictating a public statement on regulatory integrity when his aide interrupted for the 3rd time. "What now?" he snapped. "Sir," the aide said carefully, "human personnel departures are increasing across multiple sectors." "Then replace them." "We are attempting to determine with whom." Sareth Ka stared at him. For the first time since the vote, he no longer looked pleased. By 0300 station time, the number had doubled. By dawn, it had tripled. The resignations arrived through ordinary channels, staff portals, contract systems, departmental notice boards, encrypted legal submissions. Every form complete. Every notice period correctly cited. Every departure timed to the minimum obligations required under existing agreements. There was nothing to challenge. That made it worse. At Medical Station Marith, Administrator Uberoff opened his morning dashboard, expecting the usual staffing variances and maintenance requests. Instead, he found 17 pending departures in emergency medicine, 6 in diagnostics, 4 in xenopharmacology, and an entire human night shift coordination team marked for release within 30 days. He called Dr. Voss immediately. She answered from a corridor already lined with moving crates. "Doctor, this appears to be an error." "It is not. You cannot remove this many specialists simultaneously." "We are not removing anyone," she said calmly. "We are honoring our contracts. Marith cannot maintain service levels without." "Then I recommend updating service levels." The line disconnected. At the Inner Belt Cargo Exchange, the first visible disruption was not delayed freight, but silence. Booking queues that had run smoothly for decades simply stopped accepting new submissions. Existing shipments remained scheduled. Active contracts continued. But requests for next month, next week, next cycle all returned the same courteous automated notice. No new commercial engagements are being accepted at this time. Merchants filed complaints. Trade offices filed inquiries. No one knew whom to escalate to because the firms involved had always solved problems before escalation was necessary. At Relay Station Board 4, Supervisor Tauren reviewed the final maintenance package left by the departing human team. Every system was green. Every checklist complete. Every future service interval noted. Every repair cross-reference to manuals and archive diagrams. It was, Tauren realized with growing irritation, perfect. He would prefer negligence. Negligence could be punished. Competence that left gracefully was harder to resent. On Station 8Han, Emergency Coordination opened a monitoring file titled Human Personnel Withdrawal, Transitional Effects, Priority Low. That classification lasted 6 hours. By noon, reports had expanded from staffing losses to process gaps, translation delays in mixed species courts, custom slowdowns where human logistics clerks had handled exception routing, 3 research stations requesting emergency extensions because departing human technicians were the only certified operators of legacy equipment no one else had bothered to learn. High Arbiter Sun read each notice in silence. Then he requested a comprehensive census of all human personnel embedded in Conclave infrastructure. The clerk returned 20 minutes later, looking less composed than before. "Arbiter," he said, "there is no single registry." Sun raised one heavy brow. "No registry?" Humans entered under separate member, contractor, consultant, commercial, and associate classifications over 63 years. Records are distributed across 12 jurisdictions. How many? We do not know yet. Across the chamber, Seraph Ka was informed of the same problem. His markings flashed bright yellow. "Find out," he said. "We are trying." Try faster. But numbers on paper were slower than people leaving in real time. By the end of the first day, 217 departures had been formally logged. That was only the count of those who had bothered to file centrally. No one yet knew how many more were already packing boxes. The second day began with a problem, so small most officials ignored it. A cargo routing update failed to publish. Every 6 weeks, the Conclave Transit Network pushed revised lane tables to freight carriers across member space. Traffic density, fuel depot status, seasonal hazards, minor gravitational drift in unstable corridors. Thousands of variables were adjusted automatically. It was routine enough that no senior official had ever attended a briefing on it. At 0615, the update stalled at 93%. At 0622, it completed anyway. At 0840, 3 freighters reported contradictory navigation data near the Keth inner lanes. Nothing dangerous, merely inefficient. One vessel was rerouted through a secondary corridor that added 9 days to delivery time. Another was sent to a depot that no longer stocked its fuel class. A third entered a queue behind 14 ships because the network had treated an obsolete checkpoint as active. Annoying, not urgent. By noon, 27 more complaints had been filed. The Technical Bureau opened a ticket. Priority Standard. 2 junior analysts were assigned. They spent the afternoon tracing version logs through documentation, layers no one had examined in years. Near the bottom of the architecture notes, buried beneath old revision stamps and compliance signatures, one analyst found a maintenance reference. Halverson Logistics Solutions. Contract ref, HLS 7741. Status, expired/non-renewed. Who are they? The first analyst asked. The second searched. Human subcontractor. How many people maintain this? A longer pause. It says 2. 2 people had managed the routing architecture for 19 years. The analysts escalated the ticket immediately. Elsewhere, the cracks widened. At Medical Station Meredith, triage times increased by 11% after the human night shift supervisors trained their replacements and then declined overtime requests with impeccable politeness. No rules were broken. No one could compel extra labor from staff already leaving. At Customs Port Lerna, inspection throughput dropped when a human exception clerk departed and took with him 20 years of memory regarding undocumented but tolerated trade shortcuts everyone relied on and no one had formalized. At Arbitration Bureau Quorum, 3 ongoing territorial disputes were postponed because case indexing software had been privately maintained by a human legal team now operating from outside conclave jurisdiction. Still, many officials insisted the disruption was temporary. This is adjustment turbulence, said the more commercial authority. Short-term labor repositioning, said Appel Minister. Emotional overreaction by a departing population, said Sarith Kah during a press statement he later regretted. High Arbiter Sun said nothing publicly. Privately, he requested historical dependency assessments on all systems with human origin components. The answer returned incomplete. There were too many systems to audit quickly. That evening, Sun remained alone in his office under permanent white light and reviewed the exile decree line by line. Membership removal, transit standing revoked, residency protections limited, commercial entities reclassified. He read the text twice more, searching for clauses about continuity obligations, transitional staffing mandates, emergency retention powers. There were none. The decree had been written to remove humans. No one had thought to ask what happened if humans agreed. Across conclave space, transport departed on schedule. Some carried families. Some carried specialists. Some carried people who had spent decades making stations function smoothly enough that no one noticed them until they were gone. At each dock, the departures were quiet. That silence was beginning to frighten people. For months after the vote, the final agreement was signed on Sala 7, not in the Grand Assembly Hall, with its windowless stone and ceremonial lights, not beneath the banners of 12 species arranged in a circle designed to resemble equality. It was signed in a glass-walled conference room overlooking a human shipyard where construction never seemed to stop. Outside the window, carriers moved in disciplined arcs between docking towers. Freight modules crossed magnetic rails. New station segments rotated slowly into position against the stars. Inside, the conclave delegation reviewed the last page in silence. The terms were clear. Licensing rights for human-designed infrastructure would be recognized and compensated. Legacy systems still operating inside conclave space would continue under paid service agreements until replacements were built. Labor differentials owed to human workers under 63 years of associate tier classification would be repaid through structured settlements. Earth jurisdiction arbitration rulings would receive reciprocal standing under the new trade framework. An independent Earth conclave corridor would be open beyond membership status. Trade would continue. Dependence would continue.
Only the direction of authority had changed. Ambassador Swenville of the Keth signed first for the conclave. Her movements were precise, professional, and just tired enough to be honest. Yara Oay signed second. No cameras had been invited. There would be official statements later, carefully phrased by committees determined to sound victorious. Historic cooperation, renewed partnership, forward-looking framework, necessary modernization, language designed to hide who had come to whose table. When the signatures were complete, aides gathered copies and withdrew. The room emptied until only Yara and Swenville remained. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. At last, Swenville looked toward the shipyard beyond the glass. "You planned for this a very long time," she said. Yara considered the question hidden inside the statement. "We planned for possibilities," she replied. "This was only one of them. You could have asked to return." "We were invited to belong conditionally," Yara said. "We declined." Swenville gave a tired laugh that contained no amusement. "You know many on the council still call this extortion." "Many on the council," Yara said, mistaken voices for threats. That almost earned a smile. Swenville rose, gathered her case, then paused at the door. "For what it is worth," she said, "I voted yes because I believed humans would fight, delay, negotiate, make noise." Yara met her eyes. "We did negotiate." Swenville inclined her head once in acknowledgement and left. Yara remained by the window after the door closed. Below, workers in gray uniforms guided a newly completed freight spine into place with practiced calm. On a distant platform, children were racing each other between support columns while two engineers pretended not to notice. Somewhere deeper in the station, a shift bell sounded and was answered by the movement of thousands of people who had too much work to do to celebrate for long. She opened the signed file one final time. The Conclave had not restored Earth's membership. Earth had not requested it. Instead, the Conclave had rewritten its commercial law to recognize humanity as an independent partner power. Its trade lanes now crossed human-licensed corridors. Its disputes increasingly entered courts operating under Earth jurisdiction. Its infrastructure still ran on systems carrying human signatures at the bottom of old code and new contracts alike. No fleets had fired. No worlds had burned. No speeches of revenge had ever been given. Yet the balance of power had changed more permanently than war usually managed. The old chamber on Station 8Han had no windows because its builders believed permanence came from shutting out the stars. They had been wrong. Permanence came from becoming necessary. Yara closed the file. Then she turned from the glass and went back to work.